Maserati 3200. Talk to me. Come on, you got to seduce me. You don't just jump into bed with Terry Ticks.
Cervélo reached out to me to ask me to do a video talking about the Caledonia, as I've used this bike pretty much since it was launched. They asked me to do a bit of a long-term review about how I found this bike to live with day to day and what I think some of the strengths and weaknesses of it are. So obviously, if you're watching this, you probably know I am sponsored by Cervélo, so please feel free to take this review however you feel fit. Kind of makes sense. Cervélo bought out the Caledonia. It was created as the last bike that was designed in Cervélo's Toronto office, and it was called the Caledonia because of the road that the office was on, which was called Caledonia Road. That road itself had a really broken up, bad surface, lots of potholes, gravelly bits on it, and they wanted to design a bike that would be the perfect bike to kind of deal with that surface to and from the office. When Cervélo designed the Caledonia, they were trying to design a bike that would probably be the right bike for 80 to 90% of people out there. That's a really wide spectrum of people. Why they sort of said that was that they believe that there is two kind of markets for bikes at the moment. So there's bikes that are designed for the World Tour and professional peloton, and bikes that are being used by yourself, myself, people who are normal people who aren't professional cyclists. There are some slight differences in the Caledonia compared to, say, the R5, but there are also quite a few similarities that are in the R3, the C series, and the Caledonia. One of the things to mention is that the Caledonia 5 has been raced at World Tour level. In 2022, it was used at Paris-Roubaix and used at Flanders by some of the riders at Jumbo-Visma and in some of the other cobbled races as well. For Cervélo, what was really nice is to have the approval tick that it has been used in a World Tour race at the highest level, but that was never the primary focus for this bike. When Cervélo launched the Caledonia, they launched it as the bike that was designed for big, stupid rides, whether that is going for a 100 to 200 mile ride with your mates, going on a bike touring trip, going and riding some mixed terrain surfaces, kind of like ticking off all those kind of things which you could do on one bike. This bike was seen as a bit of a predecessor to the C series, so the C3 and the C5 edition bikes, which were brought out, I think, like 2017, 2016, something around then. When the C series came out, I think a lot of people weren't really sure what that bike was. It was always a bike that was a little bit too ahead of its time. It was released as an endurance-focused bike, but had the ability to be used as a gravel bike, as a road bike. You can mount mud guards to it as well. I had a C3 and I bought it myself, and actually was one of my favorite bikes that I own. And then subsequently, that bike was eventually discontinued and Cervélo bought out the Caledonia. The Caledonia took influences from the C series bike and also the R3 Mud. And the R3 Mud was Cervélo's bike that they released specifically for cobbled classics, so Flanders and Roubaix. It was basically an R3, which basically had wider forks and chainstays to accommodate bigger tyres for riding on the cobbles. That bike was never made as a mass production bike that was available to purchase, but was used and raced lastly by Dimension Data and many of the previous Cervélo sponsors teams before that. Cervélo released two options for the Caledonia. You have the Caledonia 5 and the Caledonia. There are some slight differences in these. They are offered at quite similar specs. So the Caledonia 5 is designed around having a fully integrated cable setup and is primarily focused on being built up with an electronic group set, whether that's from Shimano or SRAM or Campag. Other main features of that bike is it's a lighter carbon layup and has the R5 seat post on it, which is a slightly aero-shaped seat post, which is a D-shaped seat post. The frame set itself is, as I said, is slightly lighter and designed to be the top-end version of the bike. Now the Caledonia, you can install that with a mechanical group set, and it has the ability to fit onto it normal stem and handlebars, so you can easily adjust and change your setup to whatever you'd like. The seat post is a standard round seat post on that, and the frame also comes with the two bottle hole mounts to allow you to fit a top tube bento box, snack pouch thing, whatever you want to call it. The Caledonia frame set is also a slightly heavier frame set as opposed to that of the Caledonia 5. But if you were to look at them side by side, aesthetically they are incredibly similar. They both have the same kind of tyre clearance. They both have the ability to mount the mud guards as well. So if you were to compare, say, the Caledonia and the Caledonia 5 to the R5, for example, the R5 is an out-and-out race bike designed for climbing and designed to be super racy and twitchy. The Caledonia is designed to be a more calm and steady ride, way more stable. There's a few things that Cervélo have done with designing the frame to help with this. The first thing Cervélo did with the design of the frame is they lowered the bottom bracket. This helps to make you feel more planted when you're riding. The bottom bracket on an R5 or an S5 is much higher, which will help make it feel a bit more twitchy and a bit more racy. Now the other difference is the head tube angle. R5 that has a 73-degree head tube angle, while the Caledonia has a 72-degree head tube angle. Now that 1 degree may sound like it's almost negligible when you think about it, but that does massively change how the bike handles in the front end. As I've already said, it makes it feel calmer, a bit less twitchy and a bit less agile, but it means that if you're, say, descending at really high speeds, it'll feel super steady and super smooth and actually kind of cushiony in a weird way of wording it. So the bike itself was designed around a 30mm tyre, but you could ride a 31mm tyre depending on your tyre choice and rim choice, with mudguards or fenders, depending what you want to call them, and not have any issues in terms of clearance there. Or if you didn't have the mudguards or fenders on the bike, you could run a 34-ish tyre, depending on the tyre choice and rim choice on the bike, which means you could probably actually put on like a gravel tyre, like I've done, and have no real issues in terms of clearance or anything like that. So what they have done, as I said, with designing the bike around a 30mm tyre, is that this gives the frame 60mm of trail, which means that the steering feels really responsive and fast, but still the overall ride quality is very calm. The last thing to mention in terms of the frame is that the chainstays are 415mm, which is 5mm longer than you would have on the R5. This means that the back end does feel like it turns really well, but it also still feels steady, planted and calm. The shorter chainstays will make it feel more agile and nippy, and 415 is still quite short as a chainstay goes compared to like a out and out gravel bike, for example, which will have an even longer chainstay. Some people have asked me saying, can you use the Caledonia as an off-road bike? And I've used it off-road and had no issues at all riding it as an off-road bike. The limits of it, as I've already mentioned, is to do with the tyre clearance. You might be limited by what you can find in terms of a gravel tyre that will fit in that 34mm kind of window. I've currently got mine set up with Schwalbe G1 Speeds, which is like a fast rolling gravel tyre, not a proper out and out gravel tyre, but it's a really versatile tyre that works great on the road as well as off-road. I've got 30mm on there at the moment because I have it built up with the mudguards, and I use it as mainly as a bike with the mudguards on it. It's a really useful feature to be able to ride a high performance bike with mudguards installed in it and kind of not have to worry about ruining yourself with mud and filth. A lot of people have also said to me, should I own an Aspero or a Caledonia? Or is the Aspero a bit overkill for a certain ride that I'm doing? Now, some of the differences between those two bikes are the tyre clearance. The Aspero is an out and out gravel bike, so it has much wider tyre clearance. The other thing is the geometry of the bike. The Aspero as a gravel bike is designed to be a racing gravel bike, so it is somewhat more aggressive than the Caledonia in terms of its geometry. For me, my position on the Caledonia is much more upright compared to what I have on the Aspero, as it's designed to be the bike for long, silly rides and projects and bike packing trips. So I want it to be more comfortable. I don't need it to be crazy aggressive or racing. While the Aspero, I have that set up to be quite an aggressive bike for racing and also for bike packing races, which are off-road. Now, you can obviously set them up however you'd like and whatever works best with your fit, but that's what I found with one of the differences in looking at them side by side is that the Caledonia is a less aggressive frame set. So if you do, for example, think the Aspero might be overkill for that bike ride or adventure you're planning to do, maybe the Caledonia is a good option for you, where you're maybe more road focused but having some mixed surfaces and not so much solely riding off-road, where you probably do need the versatility and the ability of the Aspero. I have the Caledonia 5, which you can see lovingly placed behind me on my living room side, which might not go down too well. This is a bike that I've used a lot over the last couple of years. I've used it on bike packing trips. I rode 1,800 kilometers around Spain with it on a bike packing trip across mixed surfaces of road and off-road. I've used it for touring with friends, gravel rides locally around here, and I've used it as my kind of go-to winter training bike, and even use it on the turbo quite a lot recently. Now, To me, this bike does make a lot of sense as a bike that can be a bit more of a do-it-all bike because of its ability to kind of cover off so many different things. As a touring bike for a long bike packing trip, I found it really comfortable. I still felt like the power transfer was really good, and it still felt quite racy and fun to ride out. In terms of mounting points, there's not really any mounting points on the frame set. And one of the things that I would love to see in any future Caledonias is having those bolt points that are in the Caledonia and not the Caledonia 5 across the whole range. It's one of the features that is on the Aspero and the Aspero 5, and for me it would be really cool to see that across both of the bikes, because it actually is quite useful being able to have a food pouch there with food, battery pack, whatever it is. And as this bike aims to be the bike for silly bike rides, I want somewhere to put my Reese's Pieces and Haribo. Personally, I'm a big fan of the integration and having all the cables integrated into the frame. Cervélo have designed a D-shaped steerer, which allows the cables to go under the handlebars, through the stem, and then down into the steerer. The cables then sit at the front of the D and are kind of like quite nicely mounted there. It means they've designed a very specific bung, which is designed for that D shape. And you can use other brand stems and handlebars with that still on the 5. You will just have to check that there's an appropriate spacer or an adapter that's made so it will fit perfectly on the frame. I know that FSA and Vision, for example, do make adapters that will work with the Caledonia and other Cervélo bikes with this integrated setup, and that's partly because of FSA and Vision's relationship with Jumbo-Visma as a team. The other thing I really like about the integration in terms of like bike packing is all the cable being hidden and internal means it doesn't get like frame rub. You've got a bar bag there and it doesn't bend the cables in a weird way. It kind of keeps them safe and they're not going to get exposed or damaged in any way. As I said, this is a feature that is on the 5 and not available in the Caledonia, but there's still ways that you can minimize the cabling on the normal Caledonia by running one of the SRAM group sets, which just has less cables, or even the new Shimano group sets that have wireless shifters as well. This bike definitely fits into the market modern road bike. It's kind of a bike that is designed to do it all, and it does do all of it pretty damn well. Of course, it's not as specific as owning a gravel bike or an aero road bike or a hill climb bike, for example, but as a bike that could be your one bike that kind of ticks everything off pretty well, it could be a really good option for you to look at and consider. Now, the topic on mudguards is always something that seems to be highly discussed and contested in cycling. For me personally, if you're going on a group ride in the winter, mudguards are an essential to have on a bike. In the UK, our roads get covered in grit, salt, dirt, mud, oil, dead things, sand, potholes, etc, etc, etc. Our roads get covered in a lot of stuff, so trying to like protect the frame and prolong your components in the winter, to me it seems really wise to have mudguards on a bike. I use the Caledonia as my main bike in the winter because of the ease of being able to install the mudguards and being able to install proper solid fenders. The system that Cervélo have designed is quite simple. It's basically the bolt that goes at the back of the fork crown, and then it mounts effectively into the through axle on the front, and on the rear you have a special wishbone style clamp that attaches to the rear stays, and same mounts through the through axle as well. It's actually a 5-minute job to remove them and like a 5-minute job to install them again. So if you only had one bike and you wanted to have your mudguards on the winter and then to use this as your summer bike as well, it's really actually quite easy to do that. So in terms of what I think about this bike, I'll be honest, when Cervélo first released it, I wasn't sure I would like it. I wasn't sure if it was the right bike for me. I've always kind of used more aggressive racy bikes and found them really comfortable. I've never really had any issues on that sense. But the more I got to use the Caledonia, the more I actually realized that I quite liked it as a bike to use, as my go-to bike for long, steady rides. It was that bike when it first released that I just wasn't quite sure where it sat in terms of the scale of other bikes on the market. And the more I got to use it, I sort of realized actually this bike fits perfectly in that endurance focused bike for long rides, and also those rides where you're going out with your mates and sort of smashing around. Why I think it's so good is that it is comfortable, it is stable, it's calm, it's perfect for using for touring, and also it's still twitchy enough and stiff enough that it feels like you could go out on a hard, pacey group ride with your mates. The bike itself still looks pretty aero, if that's your thing, but also it does work really well as your day-to-day commuter, if that's your thing. There is a few things though I would say that I would love to see Cervélo improve in the next iteration of the Caledonia and the Caledonia 5. They're not massive things. I think the bike itself is really well designed, but there are a few little things that I would love to see to take this bike to the next level in a way. This is of course my opinion. I don't expect it to happen. The first thing I'd love to see is I'd love Cervélo to include the bento box holes in the top tube. I've always thought that having the ones bolted on just feels way nicer and cleaner. So I'd love to see those bolt points on the Caledonia 5 that are already on the Caledonia, because I would just permanently have a bento box, snack box thing mounted there anyway, like I currently do with my Aspero 5. The next thing for me that I'd love to see, which we are starting to see with some of Cervélo's bikes, is the introduction of a threaded bottom bracket. So the current Caledonia and Caledonia 5, they use basically a BB Wright bottom bracket, which is Cervélo's own bottom bracket standard. This is a ceramic speed one. It is very good, and I don't think generally I've had really many issues with it. I just prefer a threaded bottom bracket. For me, I prefer it in terms of maintenance, and it's much easier to live with day to day, especially on a bike that ends up being the one that I kind of do a bit of off-road, a bit of road on. And what we've seen with Cervélo with the new Soloist and the R5 CX is they brought in a T47 bottom bracket, which is a threaded bottom bracket, but also designed in a similar way to the BB Wright system. So it's still an oversized bottom bracket, which is super stiff. They brought this in for the R5 CX and the Soloist, as it just helps with day-to-day maintenance and accessibility, changing stuff, repair, all that kind of stuff. It's more easy to deal with day-to-day. We are seeing a lot of bike brands going back to threaded bottom brackets now, which is quite interesting and quite exciting at the same time. Threaded bottom brackets. Now the last thing I'd love to see on the Caledonia and the Caledonia 5 is the ability to fit a slightly wider tyre in it. There seems to be this trend at the moment with gravel bikes that wider tyres, bigger tyres, the more volume you can get is better. We're seeing gravel bikes now that are quite comfortably able to have 29er mountain bike tyres in. And yes, you can fit a much larger volume tyre with a 650B wheel, but what I would love to see in the Caledonia is the ability to have 34mm tyres with the mud guards on as well. And so that would probably allow you to have like nearly a 40mm tyre internally of the frame. Now I admit that probably does start to blur the lines between the differences between the Caledonia and the Aspero, but I feel that that also opens up the options in what you can do with the bike. If it's a bike which is for big stupid rides, having a bigger tyre clearance might actually be more beneficial for certain riders in terms of comfort and the ability to take it a little bit off-road if you wanted to. So since I've had the Caledonia 5, there's actually quite a lot of things I've changed on it, and that's just to make it more personal to me and how I like to ride. The bike I have started off as an Ultegra Di2 11-speed group set on it, and now the things I've changed on that to start with is I've gone to the GRX Di2 shifters. In terms of performance difference, they work in exactly the same way as the Ultegra shifters, but I prefer the modulation of the braking, the ability to be able to get your hands under the hoods and still be able to brake really well. But in terms of like a Di2 shifter, they work in the same way. The next thing I changed is the crank on it. I took off the Ultegra crank and put on a Dura-Ace power meter on it. I'm running compact chain rings, so 50-34 with an 11-34 cassette. So I've done this because I just think that that as a ratio setup allows you to kind of get up everything. It's quite versatile for riding if you're going to do some off-road stuff. And also it feels like if you're on a loaded bike when you're touring or doing a bike packing race, it doesn't feel like that weight is going to force you to grind on a gear. I've used various different wheels on this bike over the years that I've had it. I've used some from Parkour's, the outer wheel, which is their gravel focused wheel, which is a really wide rim. And the wheels that are now currently on it are Reserve 35s, which are actually the wheels that came with the bike originally. I'm now sponsored by Reserve, so all of my bikes I'm using Reserve wheels on. But as these are the ones that came with it and I had them, I resorted to putting them back on the bike. The tyres, as I've said, on it at the moment are a more gravel focused tyre. It's the Schwalbe G1 Speed, but to be honest, I don't think it's actually any slower on the road. It's a 30mm tyre, super comfy, and it just is a bit more robust if you do end up hitting some light gravel as well. Change the stock saddle, but that's kind of something that everyone will do anyway on bikes. The stock saddle that does come with the bike is a good saddle, but it's just not the saddle that works for me. The handlebars on it, I changed to a slightly narrower handlebar than what came with the bike. They came with 42s, I think, and I changed them to 40s. These are Cervélo's own handlebars that are on the bike, but as I've already mentioned, you could install something else, depending on how the cable integration works from that. But what I like about the Cervélo ones is all the cable integration is still external, so it's easy to service, but it does run in a channel under the handlebar that goes into the stem. So it's just quite clean and tidy. This is a bike that I was pleasantly surprised with when I actually started to use it and live with it day to day. I guess it wasn't necessarily what I thought it was gonna be, and I've ended up loving it the more I've used it and been more and more impressed with it and the versatility and capabilities of it as a bike. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found this quite useful and interesting on how I've found the Caledonia 5 to live with over the last couple of years that I've had it. If you like this video, I'm more than happy to do more of these kind of things, talking about some of the other bikes in the Cervélo range. So drop me a comment below and let me know what you think, and I'll see you for the next one.